know the ladies have some other function tonight. Still 7:29. We'll give it another minute or two.
No change in views as to when the davening will start again, Rabbi?
They've definitely put it on hold until the July, till the end of June. It's quite a bit of frustration why schools, why schools are not opening.
Yeah.
One of the problems is that it's very hard to control adults. It's easier to control a disciplined environment of school. We had Terry's wedding. Mazel tov, Terry, joined us. Lance, nice to see you.
Hi, how's it, Rabbi?
Baruch Hashem, good. I'm saying that to get together and you start telling them to separate by 2 meters, they look at you funny, like, you know, what
yeah.
the students at least conform. So the danger is that you open up a shul and then somebody who's older wants to say Kaddish and should not. It's very hard to draw the lines. Busy opening classes, like slowly at school. I'm in touch with Professor Shub regularly. It's very, it's like uncharted territory, concerned. How are the Pozniaks? Nice to see you. Nice to see Etta and Toby. Welcome, Philip.
Thank you. Thank you. How are you all?
Is that Peter Pozniak?
Robert Pozniak.
Hello, Robert. Are you the brother of or?
No. Peter, I'm aware of Peter Pozniak, but we spell our name P-O-Z and they spell it P-O-S.
Okay, because you look very similar. You really do.
Maybe well.
Okay, welcome everybody who's joined. I'm going to take the liberty of muting everybody. But if you want to say anything, you can press your unmute button. As I keep saying that I'm perfecting this mute button for when we get back to shul. I'm going to see if it works over there as well. And we can just press the mute button and the shul goes quiet. I'm not quite sure if we can pull it off. But while we're on Zoom, we definitely can. Hi everybody. Okay, so as we do it every week, I'm going to start off with a brief synopsis of what this Shabbos reading is all about, this week's Torah portion. And then we'll go into some of the issues in more detail. So, starting with a summary of the Parsha itself. It's a portion of Shelach. The main theme is the sending out of spies, or a group of people who would go out and tour the land and report back to Moshe Rabbeinu. And Hashem allows this. So the first opening lines of the portion talks about, which is the third portion in the book of Numbers, talks about the fourth portion, talks about Hashem allowing Moshe Rabbeinu to send spies. A representative of each tribe is chosen. The only tribe that is not represented is the tribe of Levi, but altogether 12. We still have 12 because we know that Binyamin and Yosef are considered two separate. Ephraim and Manasseh are considered two separate tribes, so there were still 12 of them. So they come back and they were told to report on the strength and the weakness of the land and bring back samples. So they set out and they spend 40 days in the land. And they return with giant produce, because the way it's described is they carried these bunches of grapes, bamoit, on staves, and the plural is used for Rashi to explain that they actually had a number of people dedicated to carrying clusters of grapes. That is how giant and how big they were. And they in fact reported back that it was a land flowing with milk and honey. They could substantiate what God had said about the land. Yes, this is a land of flowing with milk and honey. And then they begin their ominous report that it's a land filled with giants, it's fortified, and they draw the conclusion that it is impossible to conquer this land. We don't stand a chance. That is how they return. That's the message they come. And of the 10 people, of the 12 people, two of them, Joshua and Caleb, report that it's in fact a beautiful land and we will be victorious. So we have 10 verses 2. Now, interestingly, I'm just going to stop for a second, that one of the sources of the reason why we need 10 people for a minyan, which our motley crew of Talmudists learned recently in the tractate of Brachot. So we learned that one of the sources, that how do we know that you need 10 people to make up a minyan? Maybe it's 9, maybe it's 8, maybe it's 12. So one of the sources is the fact that the 10 people who returned with a negative report about the land are called Ha'edah. In fact, the wording of God is, till when will this evil Edah, which means a congregation, rebel against me? So it's a very negative source and frame of reference, that we're talking about 10 of the 12 spies, 2 of them, Joshua and Caleb, we just said, came back with a favorable report, but 10 came back with a negative report, and God himself calls them an Edah, a congregation of evil. So from there, says the tractate Talmud, tractate Brachot, we learn the concept of a minyan being 10 people from this source, which at the time we discussed at length, that it's very strange that the source of 10 people for a minyan has such a negative connotation. It's 10 people who were involved in undermining God's purpose rather than achieving it. And we did see some of the commentaries to explain that it is counterintuitive, but we're trying to say that if 10 people can cause so much negativity in the entire community, that is how powerful they are to do that which is inappropriate. How much more so when we align ourselves with God's mission, that we can achieve the goal that Hashem wants us to achieve. So we learn from a negative place, but how much more so would that apply if we used 10 people to create a minyan? May that happen very soon. Moving on with a summary of the portion, Hashem, the people cried. They realized that they cannot take this promised land, too complicated, too fortified. So they begin to cry the whole night. And they say what has been said a few times in the desert, let us return to Egypt, because we remember the good old days. The good old days in Egypt, there things were just so perfect, but we didn't have to deal with all of these problems. We want to go back. Hashem appears to the Jewish people, and he says, that's it. You want to go back? It is the end. I'm now about to destroy the entire Jewish people. He says to Moses, I'll build a new nation from you. But Moshe Rabbeinu pleads with God, and his main motivation to God is, what will the people of the world say? They'll say that, God, you are so powerful that you could overwhelm Egypt with plagues and with this whole miraculous story of the Exodus. But once you got to the mighty nations of the promised land, of the land of Canaan, that's when you ran out of steam and you didn't have any more strength. It'll be a desecration of your name that you've taken out this people to destroy them in the desert. And people will misread your motive and say the real reason why you destroyed them in the desert was because you didn't have the capacity to bring them into the promised land. Anyway, Moses really pushes his luck with God, and he says, you cannot destroy this people, and God moves away from the extreme measure that he intended, and he says, fine, I will only destroy this particular generation. This generation that left Egypt will not come into the promised land. Aside from the 2 people, Joshua and Caleb, Joshua who was destined to lead the Jewish people, and Caleb, they will take the Jewish people into the promised land, but nobody else will make it. Now what happens is, this is typically the Jewish response, the extremists jump in, and they say, okay, so if that's going to be the measure that God you're going to have against us, we will go. We're ready to go to the promised land, and we're going to do it now. And they are warned that you don't have God's instruction to take the land now, so don't try. But a whole contingent of our people start making their way up to the promised land, they encounter the nation of Amalek, who were enemies of us from the past, and the people of Canaan, and they are decimated. That whole regiment of Jews that decided that now that they were told not to, they will in fact do it. Too late, he cried, and they were decimated. And then comes seemingly unrelated commandments, disjointed unrelated commandments, but nothing is by chance in the Torah. And we're given the commandment that when we would bring a sacrifice, it would be accompanied by a meal offering, an offering of wheat, of flour, and that would be accompanied by a libation of wine, which would be poured from the top of the altar. And then we taught a different mitzvah, the mitzvah of challah, which women still keep till this very day, and that is Reshit Arisoteichem Tarimu, the first of your dough you will elevate and give a gift to the kohen. So we don't have the institution of the kahuna as recipients of the tithes and gifts that were given to the priest then, but we still have the mitzvah of separating a portion of the dough in the process of baking bread or challah, which is called challah, one of the three very special mitzvahs that were entrusted into the lives of women. Then there's a provision against idolatry. Then we have a bit of a deviation to discuss an individual who deliberately goes out and desecrates the Shabbos as a sign of defiance, and he is put to death. And finally, the last section of this week's portion is the third paragraph of what we say in the Shema every day, Vayomer Hashem Moshe Lemor, and it is the instruction to wear tzitzit. So really we have three commandments right at the end of the portion: libation of wine on the altar, the mitzvah of challah, and the mitzvah to wear the four-cornered garment of tzitzit, seemingly totally unrelated to the whole storyline of this week's Parsha, but we're going to see that nothing is by mistake, everything has a design. Let us begin with the insights into some of the details that relate to these, the storyline. So firstly, how did Yeshua and Kalev have the ability to confront the other 10 spies and the entire Jewish nation with so much strength and so much power that they held their ground and were not overwhelmed by the majority? So there are two different details that involve themselves in their lives prior to their departure. Firstly, it says that Moses turned to Joshua, who until that point was known as Hoshea, without the Yud. Vayikra Moshe, and Moses called Hoshea bin Nun Yehoshua. So he added a Yud, the first letter, to Joshua's name. Until then he was just Hoshea, almost Hosea. But then a Yud was added to his name and he became Yehoshua. And the reason that Moses did that was to girdle him with strength that went beyond the human ability. And we're going to come back to this theme, that when a person, I'm even reaching back to a previous episode, which I often refer to because it has so much meaning to me in my life, and that is that Abraham is promised a child. And this is way back when in the book of Genesis. And Abraham turns to Hashem and he says, I cannot have a child because I've seen in my astrological calculations that there is no child for Abraham. And God takes him outside of the tent. He says, look up, look at the stars. And he says, in actual fact, leave all of your self-imposed human limitations, the horizons which you have self-imposed on yourself as to what is the extent of your ability and strength, rise above them. Because I'm going to add a letter to your name. When Abram became Abraham, a hey was added to Abram's name. And God was saying that yes, there is a human being trying to negotiate the difficulties and the challenges of life with our own capacities, our own brain power, our own emotional strengths, and all of our experience and skills that we've accumulated in life. And very often when we look at ourselves in the mirror, we are aware of our shortcomings, and we are overwhelmed sometimes with the mission that is in front of us, and we give up because we don't believe in ourselves. We don't believe we have the capacity. And what Hashem was telling Abraham then was that if you look at yourself only in terms of your human capacity and your development and what you've achieved, you sometimes don't stand a chance. What the challenge for you to do is to recognize that as a child of Hashem, you have a letter of God's name in your name. Abram became Abraham. And with that addition, the recognition of that ingredient in your life, that you're not alone, that you enter into the fray with Hashem, with God at your side. When you are conscious of that and you embrace that strength, then all of the limitations that Abraham will never have a child, that is true. Abraham never had a child. But Abraham with the extra hey, with God's letter, did have a child, and his name was Isaac. And similarly, Moses turns to Joshua and he says, Hoshea, which means to assist. Hoshea means salvation. Salvation might elude you if you think that is all up to your own strength and ability. You go into this mission with a humility and a recognition that you have the Yud of God's name. And you are no longer Hoshea, but Yehoshua. You then enter into this mission with a totally different strength. And that enabled Joshua to stand strong even against all the adversity that he had. The question then became, why didn't Moses give some kind of God's letter from God's name to Caleb? That could have helped Caleb as well. Commentaries explain that Caleb was a brother-in-law of Moses. So when you give special gifts to family, guess what that causes to the environment? And everyone will say, you see, he's giving to his own family, and this is about preferential treatment. So Caleb had to, in fact, find his own way. And what was Caleb's method of girdling himself with additional strength that superseded and transcended his own powers was he went to the town called Hebron. And Rashi tells us that we know that he went to Hebron because subsequently it says the children of Caleb inherited the land, that region of Hebron, and it says that they inherited the land that he had traversed. So he went on a mission on his own within the mission, and he goes to Hebron. What was significant about Hebron? Hebron is where our forefathers are buried, and our mothers of our people are buried. And we know that there is so much strength that could be gained by aligning ourselves to the souls and the powerful, the Eitanim, the strong ones who precede us, and we see ourselves walking in their footsteps. Again, we're walking not alone, but we're walking with the cumulative power and strength of generations and of the origins of our generations. So going back to Hebron for Caleb was his method of going on this mission with strength beyond just his own, recognizing that he was strong in the context of the history of his people. And for that reason, each of them had their own additional strength that they looked for in order to find the power to withstand temptation. And the other 10, unfortunately, did not. And the other 10 go and come back with a negative report. So moving on to, we've seen the Yud that was added to Joshua's name, and the visit to Hebron and the burial place of the righteous and the patriarchs and matriarchs is what gave the strength to Yeshua and to Caleb. Now what we want to know is, what did they do wrong? Because if one does an analysis of the process of sending spies, so when you send spies to evaluate and to see, is it difficult, is it hard, are they strong, are they weak, then you want what kind of report? You want an honest report. So we seem to have it against the spies for coming back with a report that seemed to be negative. And the objective, appropriate method of dealing with a report is to say what you feel. So if the spies had this feeling that they were overwhelmed by what was in front of them, didn't they have a responsibility to report it and to share it, which they did? And if they did, why would we consider it a sin and a deficiency? They were simply reporting what they believed to be the truth. So why would we not accept that and embrace them for telling what they in fact experienced? So going back to our screen, we're going to see that there are in fact a number of different approaches amongst the commentaries as to what was the anatomy of failure. What actually did they do wrong? The first of them says it was a matter of whom they reported to. You know, if Moses, Moshe Rabbeinu is the commander-in-chief, sends spies to bring back a report, so it's not only what they said and the contents of what they reported. What is important is who are you speaking to? Who do you report back to? In today's times, can you imagine if the IDF would send a group of spies to go and evaluate how best to undermine or to get by the defenses of the enemy, and when they came back, they would hold a press report, a press session with CNN. So now it's not a question of what you're saying. What's the contents of what you're saying? What is your feeling? What is your reading? What is your objective analysis? That's before we even get there. They failed in the first step of reporting to the people before they reported to the commander-in-chief. And it is vitally important not only to be aware of the integrity of content, it is equally important to know where are you depositing that piece of information. And we all know, in the context of a shul, in the context of a school, wherever there are people, community, wherever they are, often there are important things that need to be said, and what can differentiate between what is helpful and what could be additional, a burden to the community or to the school, is where you report it to. In the context of school, a lot of meetings happen, well, not these days because everybody is Zooming, but a lot of meetings happen in the car park. Car parks are meant to park cars. That's actually why they were built. But some people who park cars in car parks think that in addition to that, there's a special role that can be played by having discussions about the future of the world and how you view your kid's teacher and what homework should have been. And that's where you have a whole report taking place on a daily basis. And it's not very helpful because the people who need to know what is on people's minds are not any richer and not aware of what it is that people have on their minds. So the most important thing is, if you have something important to say, is firstly to evaluate to whom. To whom am I saying it? I might say the same thing and it would be an unbelievable mitzvah, because bringing bad news to somebody who is in a position to affect change might be the biggest mitzvah. And that person, in spite of the fact that he or she has to deal with a challenge, will be so grateful that you have brought information which requires addressing and requires a lot of effort to resolve and to fix, but you are dealing with something, you have information that you can deal with. In all our relationships, it's always so important to know whom we are speaking to. And is the person we're speaking to just an opportunity to let off steam, or to churn discontent, to create a revolt or revolution, as we'll read about next week? Is it about scoring miles for oneself by becoming popular, by having something important to say that other people are going to be excited to listen to? And that could be very damaging. But if you talk to the right person, even if it is painful information, you can be a source of great blessing. So one of the commentaries, the first of these commentaries says, you know what the first and most difficult problem was? That they reported to the people. They came and they spoke to the people before they spoke to Moses. Who sent you? Moshe Rabbeinu sent you. Report back to Moses. Now comes a second attitude and method of failure, which happens in life, and that is that there is an element of positivity, an element of negativity, which creates a sandwich. There are good things and there are bad things, like everything in life. There are positives and there are negatives, strengths and weaknesses. And the way we as people portray our opinion about things is very important if you watch to see what you start with and what you end with. You could start off and say this is the most amazing human being and talk wonderful words about their achievements and accomplishment. And once you have ended and got people's attention of how wonderful the person is, you say, but, and then normally a but comes in somewhere, and then you begin to talk about the weaknesses. And by the time you've finished, you've left off with the weaknesses. So we all know that you clearly know the motivation and the objective by how you create your sandwich. Do you speak about the negatives as a lead-up, as a reality check towards the positive end that you have to talk about the strengths? Because how you end is how you're clearly leaving the people impressed with the very last thing that you've said. So did you build up a reality check of saying, yes, there are problems, there are difficulties, these are them. We actually can enumerate the challenges, but these are the solutions, and this is how we're going to deal with it and how we're going to win. That's one way. Or these are the amazing fruits. This is an incredible land flowing with milk and honey, unbelievable. Only problem is that there are giants over there, and we'll never be able to take the land. So how we introduce facts and how we dress them up, how we actually create the order, how we order the approach and the report tells a lot about what our intention is. And here the spies came and they said, wonderful, 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 but horrific. And that gave insight into the negative underlying spirit that caused so much damage in their report. A third commentary says that there's one thing called a report, and when you are sent as a group of spies to find out, is the land strong or weak? Is this city fortified or is that city fortified? Is there a method or a road that can get through the valley or up the mountain? All of those things. What's the topology like? What are the people like? What are the fortifications like? That's what a spy needs to do. But who makes the final decision as to whether the journey or the mission is possible or not? So any army would say that a spy is not a general. A spy is not the commander-in-chief. A spy reports on the details, reports to the commander-in-chief, who then has to evaluate and do an analysis of the details and come to the decision whether we are fighting or sending our troops in today or tomorrow. So when you had D-Day, or you had the landing at Normandy, and you had many spy planes that were going out to check out the fortification, you don't have an airline pilot, a fighter pilot, who's coming back with information about a particular front, being the individual who calls whether the invasion is going to be at this beach or another, or on this day or another, or after the weather clears or before. Because everybody has their own strengths and abilities. And these 12 spies were sent with the express intention of reporting on the conditions of the land. Now, when you have a responsibility and a duty to fulfill a particular objective, don't overextend yourself to become the commander-in-chief and to evaluate whether the mission is possible or not. That's not your duty. That's not your ability. That's not your training. So don't overextend yourself beyond what is your capacity to find information. And Moshe Rabbeinu will then tell you whether you are entering the land now or later. So the mistake was the conclusion that they reached that was not for them to make that kind of decision. Now comes a human failure which all of us are ever aware of, and it is one of the most detrimental methods of failing in relationships and in everything we do, and that is called the generalization. One of our methods of ensuring that we don't have to deal with problems in life is to paint the problem into such a broad picture of a kaleidoscope of problems, a whole general picture that then becomes too big to confront. So let's take it closer to people's lives. If you have a husband and wife, a man and a woman, trying to create a relationship of love and to be in a meaningful, lasting, committed relationship, there are always issues that have to be resolved. People are different. People see things differently. People have a different approach to things. Difference is a strength in a marriage. Everyone can contribute with their personality and their background, their approach, and their personality is able to bring to the fore. Now, one of the challenges is to ensure that there's shalom bayis. And one of the ways of ensuring that is to deal with whatever issues come up. So if there's a difficulty, a difference, an argument, a different approach to something, if there's honesty to talk about the details, then you're always resolving. You're always ahead of problems that could overwhelm. Often when young couple gets married and they are infatuated with each other, they're going through this romantic stage in their life where they're overwhelmed by the beauty of each other and there's love, they're love-struck in their eyes and nothing can ever go wrong and they don't deal with issues. And somewhere down the line, they've tucked away so many details under the carpet that somewhere down the line, a couple of months later, somebody trips on the carpet because there's a mountain in the lounge. Too many details. By the time they open them up, they look at each other and they say, how are we going to deal with so many things? Too much. It's just, now they used words, like when we're dealing with trying to bring shalom bayis between couples, we always say, don't use the always word. We always say, don't say always. Because as soon as you say, you always counter whatever I'm saying. You always undermine what I'm saying. You never take out the garbage. You never help me with the dishes. Oh, when it comes to always and never, you don't stand a chance. How are you going to resolve always? How are you going to resolve never? It's just too big. The generalization is a weakness of human beings and one of our methods of, in fact, not dealing with problems. Because if you go over to somebody who says, this is always, everything about this place is a problem, everything goes wrong over here. As soon as you try to say, well, let's talk about the things that have gone wrong. Was it yesterday? Let's talk about the specific issue. So it becomes a burden because as soon as you break it into details, then the next step is to say, well, what are we going to do about the detail? Let's respond to this detail with this approach. We're going to use this strategy to deal with this detail. Then it becomes solution-oriented. Solutions can only be found if you have pieces of the puzzle that you can deal with in their individual state. But if you're dealing with everything and always and everybody and never and those kind of words, you can never resolve things. So the commentaries say that when they came back and they saw problems, they came back and they said, Ra'inu Sham. We saw giants and we saw problems, saw difficulties, we saw them over there. Over there meaning everywhere. So whatever they saw as a detail in a particular place, they projected onto everywhere. So any little problem was always and everywhere and therefore beyond solution. So the failure, according to this approach of the spies, which really deals with all of our lives and how we can fail in our mission, and that is to look and find the generalizations rather than to be solution orientated and to break it into pieces and say, what is the essence? What is the detail that triggered this? Let's go back and revisit how this whole thing started. And then you open it up into units. And those units have a method of resolving, a little bit today and more tomorrow and next week. And then you have an approach to dealing with a problem. But as soon as you have the couple coming in for therapy and saying, he never and she always, and this is the syndrome of problems, multifaceted problems. So then nobody is looking to find a solution. They're only publicizing and talking about problems that are beyond resolution. And now I want to get to the final approach, not the final, there are probably many more, but we're dealing with 5 insights into the failure of the spies. And that was the subject that we were talking about, the picture that I sent out relating to today was the giant and the grasshopper. And this is such an insight into human failure. What they say when they come back is they say that there were giants there. There were people so massive and so big that we were in our own eyes like little grasshoppers. And then it says the words, V'chein hayinu b'eineihem. And so we were in their eyes. We started with a grasshopper mentality. But guess what happens as a result? You start seeing yourself as a grasshopper, then everybody's going to see you as a grasshopper. And that's what they said. We were in our own eyes, in our own estimation, we were like little grasshoppers. And that is how we were in their eyes. And Rashi continues to talk about the Midrash, that we overheard people saying that these little ant-like people, ants are walking through our vineyards, tiny little people, nothings. We'll stamp them out as if they don't exist. So this is a projection of a defeatist mentality in which we believe that we cannot. And I remember once, I think I shared at Shul once a limerick that said, he said it was a job that couldn't be done. He said it was a job that couldn't be done and half-heartedly went right to it. He tried to do what couldn't be done, and by George, he couldn't do it. Guess what happens if we believe that we're going to fail? If we believe that we're going to fail, we have failed. Because the me I see is the me I'll be. If I look at myself and believe that I'm endowed by Hashem with the strengths to confront the reality of my day, if that is my worldview, that Hashem did not make a mistake, has measured me and given me whatever it takes to endure and get through and succeed in this day. If I have that kind of faith, that I have the ability to get through the task, then we have won the battle 90%. When we went out to battle in the book of Deuteronomy, it says, Ki tetzei lamilchama al oivecha. When you go out to war on the enemy, and as the commentaries explain, what does it mean on your enemy? When you go out, your attitude has to be that I believe that I can win. I'm on my enemy. I'm on top of my enemy before I start. In my head, in my mind, in my belief of who I am as a person, I am able to fulfill the journey that is ahead of me. That is the most empowering ingredient, the most important ingredient is, do we view ourselves like grasshoppers? Because as soon as we do, everyone around us becomes giants. And that is a perspective of the world of failure because we don't believe in ourselves. We spoke about having the Yud of Yehoshua, Joshua's name, the Hey in Abraham's name. There is an endowment in every single one of us by God of strength, ability, capacity to fulfill objectives. And if we don't believe in ourselves, then we do not stand a chance. This is an incredible insight into the projection of a human being into the headspace of somebody else. If I would walk out and constantly be aware that I am looking Jewish, and it's amazing when I go running in the morning, how many people, or when I walk on Shabbos and I say good morning and people say good Shabbos, I say, how do you know I'm Jewish? So there's a bit of a giveaway. I'm wearing a kapota and a black hat and sporting a beard. There are a few details that kind of give it away. But if you walk outside and you feel uncomfortable in your own skin as a Jew, and what your head is busy processing is, how far back can I hide whatever makes me look Jewish? And if I can conceal anything that makes me appear to anybody else too Jewish, I will have succeeded I will have negotiated the street well. Unfortunately, in some places there's anti-Semitism, and you got to play it safe just because there's danger. And then you probably wouldn't be flaunting too much. But very often, it's about a personal complex. I remember when I was a teenager and a visiting rabbi, and I want to deal with one other thing, so I better move quickly. There was a visiting rabbi, Rabbi Lou, who is a rabbi in London, and he impacted on me largely as a teenager when I was at Yeshiva College as a student. And he came out and he spoke to us, and he told a story that he was once on a train to London, and it was time to put on tefillin. So he pulled out his tefillin, he started putting on tefillin. I guess today it could happen on an airplane. And what are the thoughts that go through your head at such a time? Like, what are people going to think? Like straps, like maybe you're going to think I'm the shoe bomber. Maybe, like you can go through all kinds of things in your head. Like, why would I want to stand out in public? So he pulled out his tefillin, he puts on his tefillin on the train, and everybody, all these pommies, are looking over their newspapers and contemplating this guy doing something so unusual. Maybe today it's more a sight more usual. And when he finally got to the destination, he put on his tefillin, somebody came over to him and said, I was watching what happened on the train, and I'm really intrigued, I'm really interested to know what gave you the fortitude to do something so unusual, so strange, knowing that the whole compartment on the train would be watching you and staring you down. Why did you not get bothered by this? And Rabbi Lou said to him, I made a calculation that 5 minutes after I get off the train, how much will these people, all of these people, every one of these people, how much will they matter to me in my life? Who's going to be thinking about me tomorrow or in 10 minutes after the journey? How much do these people really matter? They matter because their eyes are looking at me for half an hour. And on the other hand, I'm in the presence of Hashem. And Hashem said, my child, this is the mission that I have for you. And there's a mitzvah called putting on tefillin. So I weighed up my options and I thought, well, who do I really want to align myself with? The guys who I'm a 5-minute wonder in their life and don't care one iota about me for tomorrow? Or in the presence of Hashem, who's endowed me with strength and given me this mission? I remember as a teenager, it really impacted me. This concept of why do we do the things we do, and what are we scared to do, and how much are we acting out of personal embarrassment and overwhelmed by attitudes and people around us? And that brings about the grasshopper mentality. So if you remember anything from tonight's share, please God, there might be 1 or 2 things you remember. Just remember the image of the grasshopper and the giant. Because every single day of our lives, we have an opportunity to look at our lives and say, am I a giant or am I a grasshopper? Or am I a little midget that's climbing, as we said last week, onto the shoulders of giants that precede me? I have tremendous strength by the kinetic energy of my people, by the continuation of so much mesirut nefesh, self-sacrifice of generation. I've been endowed with great strengths. I could be a giant. And not an arrogant one, not one that thinks I'm better than everyone else. Moses was a giant, and at the end of last week's portion, it says that Moses was the most humble person. Moshe Anav Mikol Adam, he was more humble than any other person in the world. Because he looked at everybody and he said, imagine if you had been given my opportunities, you probably would have been a better Moses than I was. He looked at around and he was humble. But he knew his strengths. He stood his ground. He knew how to talk to Pharaoh. He knew how to speak to Pharaoh. He knew how to hold his own against the very complaining Jewish people. So to be a giant doesn't mean that you have more muscles that you've pushed in the gym. It means that you have a capacity to follow through on your decisions and not be overwhelmed. And the first paragraph in our Shulchan Aruch, in the Code of Jewish Law, begins by saying, Al yevosh mipnei hamaligim. Never be embarrassed in front of those who mock and who scoff, because if that becomes your vision, your view of yourself and your ability, then you fuel that. You give them energy, you give them credulence, you give them importance, you make them grow tenfold bigger than they are. They become the giants. So weigh it up. Are you going to see yourself as a grasshopper? And by virtue of that, you make even the regular people around you become the dangerous giants? Or can you stand tall and proud and committed and strong, and thereby nothing around you really matters? It depends how you look at yourself. It depends how confident you can be in what you need to do. When I was about 14, Rabbi Eloi of the Berea Shul went overseas for a month, and he asked me to fill in for him and to do the reading of the Torah at Berea Shul over Pesach. It was like a full Parsha before Pesach and a full Parsha after Pesach, and the whole of Pesach, to daven until Shachanad and to do all the laning. And I said to my father, there's not a chance, I can't do this. And he pepped me up with confidence. And he said, when you look out, and at that time, Berea Shul, especially on Pesach, was a very full shul, talking about early 70s, is when you look out, you look at all the heads, and you got to tell yourself you're standing in a cabbage patch. I'll never forget the image, that all the heads are really cabbages in a cabbage patch. And I remember looking out, trembling in my knees, I was so nervous, and smiling in the back of my mind at this cabbage patch image that he had planted in my mind. And for sure, the conference led to confidence, because thereafter, my father used to say to me, you've done it. You did it once. You did it in Berea Shul. Why can't you do it here? Why can't you do it there? So the me I see is the me I will be. And that's so important. If we see ourselves as capable and competent and we see ourselves as extensions of Hashem's mission, then we stand like giants. And the world around us can be like cabbage patches and can be like grasshoppers. But if we're the ones to project the image on ourselves that I'm a grasshopper, that's what we're going to be. God forbid. I'm going to end over here. I'm going to open everybody, just in case everyone wants to complain about anything I said. Give you an adequate chance. If anybody wants to unmute yourself, you can just say hi, bye. Thank you all for coming. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you.
Regards from Israel.
Where's that? Moshe?
Thanks, guys. Yes.
Where are you? Oh, Moshe. You were at Yosef Chaim Shir. Moshe braved the trip this week. He went on an airplane. I saw him sitting on an empty airplane out of South Africa. And once he got to Addis Ababa, there's no coronavirus. The plane was full. Everyone was sitting next to each other. Fine. Everything's fine. May you just be gesund. I was happy to see you.
You can see the sea in Tel Aviv.
Behind you. Enjoy. Have a wonderful time. Enjoy your new grandchild.
Be all safe and healthy.
Amen. Amen.
Thank you. Thanks, Rabbi.
Be safe. Shkaya.
Thank you, everybody. Good night.
Good night.